You know that feeling when you walk into a thrift store? It's like stepping into a giant treasure chest. You never know what you're going to find. Old records, vintage clothes, quirky furniture. I love it. I was in there last Saturday, just looking for something unique to liven up my apartment. I was sifting through a bin of old trinkets, mostly forgotten toys and dusty knickknacks, when I saw her. Tucked away in the corner, almost hidden, was this doll. She wasn't like those creepy porcelain dolls with vacant stares, you know? She was actually quite pretty, with soft, blonde curls and big, blue glass eyes that seemed to follow you. She wore a delicate, old-fashioned dress, a bit faded, but still charming. She just had this presence, like she was waiting for someone. I picked her up. She was heavier than she looked, with a solid, antique feel. Her eyes, those big blue eyes, seemed to hold a hint of sadness, or maybe just a quiet wisdom. It was hard to put my finger on it, but something about her just drew me in. I don't usually buy dolls, but this one felt different, like she had a story to tell. The price tag was surprisingly low, just a few dollars. Almost like the store wanted to get rid of her. I mean, who leaves a doll like this for so cheap? A little voice in the back of my head, probably the practical one, told me to put her back. She's old, she'll just collect dust. But another voice, the curious one, the one that loves a good mystery, told me she was perfect. A unique find. A conversation starter. So I paid for her. The cashier barely glanced at the doll, just scanned the tag and bagged her up. As I walked out of the store, the afternoon sun hitting my face, I felt a strange mix of excitement and something else. A faint shiver, almost like a chill, despite the warm day. I hugged the bag a little tighter. I was excited to get her home, to find the perfect spot for her. I figured she'd look great on my bookshelf, adding a touch of vintage charm. I had no idea what I was truly bringing into my apartment. No idea at all. I finally got back to my apartment, unwrapped the doll carefully, and placed her on the top shelf of my bookshelf, right next to my old collection of classic novels. She looked perfect there. Her blue eyes seemed to survey the room with a quiet intensity. I stepped back, admiring her. See? The practical voice in my head was wrong. She didn't just collect dust, she added character. That night, I went to bed feeling pretty good about my thrifting score. I drifted off to sleep pretty quickly, thinking about work tomorrow. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until the middle of the night. I woke up suddenly, for no apparent reason. No noise, no bad dream, just awake. I lay there in the darkness for a few minutes, trying to figure out what had stirred me. Maybe I needed water? I was about to get up when I had this strange feeling, like I wasn't alone in the room. Now, my apartment is small. I live by myself. There's nowhere for anyone to hide. But this feeling was persistent, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I slowly turned my head, my eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through my window. My gaze drifted over to my bookshelf. And that's when I saw it. The doll. She was still sitting there, but something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the angle of her head? It seemed slightly tilted, as if she was looking directly at me. But I was sure I had placed her facing forward. I told myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. It was the middle of the night, I was half asleep. But as I stared at her, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, I noticed something else. Her eyes. Those big blue glass eyes. In the dim moonlight, they seemed to gleam. And it looked like they were focused right on me. Not just in my general direction, but directly at me, even though I was lying down and mostly obscured by the covers. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I kept my eyes fixed on the doll. She didn't move. Her expression, that quiet, almost sad look, remained the same. "It's just a doll," I whispered to myself, trying to sound confident. "It can't move." But as I lay back down, pulling the covers up to my chin, I couldn't shake the feeling that those blue eyes were still watching me. And for the rest of the night, Every little creak of the old building, every rustle outside my window, made me wonder if she was moving again, waiting for me to fall asleep. And a seed of genuine fear began to take root. What if it wasn't just my imagination? What if the doll was moving? That first night, the feeling of the doll watching me was strong enough to keep me on edge. I spent the next day at work trying to shake it off, telling myself it was just a silly trick of the light, a tired mind playing games. I mean, it's a doll, right? They don't move. But when I got home that evening, the first thing I did was walk straight to the bookshelf. I looked at her. She was sitting exactly where I'd left her, facing forward. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. See? Just my imagination. I was being ridiculous. I made dinner, watched some TV, tried to unwind. But every now and then, my eyes would dart to the bookshelf. And I started to notice something subtle, something that made my stomach clench. Throughout the evening, I'd get up to grab a drink or go to the bathroom. Each time, I'd pass the bookshelf. And each time, it felt like the doll's head was just a fraction of an inch more turned towards me. Not a full turn, not obvious. Just tiny, almost imperceptible shifts. Too small to be certain, but just big enough to make me doubt my sanity. I told myself it was parallax, the way things looked different from different angles. Or maybe the house was settling. But I kept walking past her, then backing up, trying to see if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Her blue eyes seemed to follow me, gleaming in the lamplight. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I decided to test it. I walked over to the bookshelf. Her head was tilted ever so slightly to the left, towards my bedroom door. I took a deep breath, and very carefully, I turned her head so she was looking straight ahead again, facing the wall. I made sure she was perfectly aligned, absolutely no tilt. I even took a quick photo with my phone, just to be sure. My hands were shaking a little, but I ignored it. I got into bed, the phone with the photo clutched in my hand. My heart was pounding. I lay there in the dark, staring at the bookshelf, at the doll. The moonlight was dim, but I could still see her, a dark silhouette against the lighter wall. I didn't close my eyes. Just watched. The minutes dragged on. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I started to relax, telling myself I was being paranoid. This was a normal doll. A harmless thrift store find. Just as my eyelids began to droop, just as I was about to give in to sleep, I saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift. Her head, slowly, silently began to turn. Not much, just a tiny fraction of an inch, but it was there. My eyes snapped wide open. I saw it move. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the shadows. The doll's head was turning towards me, inch by agonizing inch, in the darkness. A cold dread spread through me, chilling me to the bone. She was moving. When I wasn't looking, when I was trying to sleep. And those blue glass eyes, now gleaming in the dim light, felt like they were fixed on me, waiting. My apartment, once a safe haven, suddenly felt very, very small. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I wasn't alone. The chill from seeing the doll's head move in the dark lingered long after the sun came up. My logical brain screamed for a rational explanation, but my eyes had seen what they saw. It wasn't my imagination. She was moving, and the thought of her shifting silently in the shadows while I slept, it was unnerving. I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know for sure. I had to catch her. So, that morning, I formulated a plan. I wasn't just going to watch her, I was going to document it. Before I left for work, I took my phone and carefully positioned it on a stack of books on my nightstand. I aimed the camera directly at the doll on the bookshelf. Then I hit record. I set it to time-lapse mode, hoping to capture any subtle movement over several hours. It felt a little silly, setting up a surveillance camera for a doll, but the knot of fear in my stomach told me it was necessary. I went to work, but my mind was miles away. All I could think about was the doll, sitting there, waiting for me to leave. What would the video show? Would it be nothing, proving my paranoia? Or would it confirm my terrifying suspicion? The workday dragged on forever. As soon as I could, I rushed home. My heart was pounding as I unlocked my apartment door. I didn't even take off my shoes. I went straight to my bedroom, practically pouncing on my phone. The recording light was still on. I stopped the recording and immediately went to play it back. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. The initial frames showed the doll sitting perfectly still, just as I'd left her. I fast-forwarded, watching hours of static footage. My anxiety built with every passing second. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just tired and imaginative. And then I saw it. It started subtly. A tiny shift. Her head slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to tilt to the side. Then, a few minutes later, her left arm seemed to lift ever so slightly, just enough to break the perfect stillness. It wasn't a sudden jolt. It was fluid, deliberate. Like a slow, drawn-out stretch. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in, played it back frame by frame. There was no denying it. The doll was moving. On her own. Her head tilted further, her arm continued its slow arc. And then, the most terrifying thing of all, her eyes, those big blue glass eyes, slowly, silently, seemed to focus directly on the camera, which meant on me. It was like she knew she was being watched. I dropped my phone on the bed, my stomach lurching. The cold, hard proof was staring back at me from the screen. This wasn't a trick of the light, not my imagination, not a dream. The doll from the thrift store was alive. Or something like it. And she had been moving in my apartment, watching me, even when I wasn't there. The quirky new decoration had turned into a chilling nightmare, and the fear was no longer a seed. It was a sprawling, suffocating vine. The video footage was irrefutable. My breath hitched every time I replayed it. The slow, deliberate turn of her head, the subtle lift of her arm, those blue eyes shifting, seeming to land directly on the camera lens. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the lighting. This doll, this seemingly innocent thrift store find, was moving. On her own. While I was gone. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't just a quirky antique. This was something else. I didn't know what, but the very fact of its movement, combined with the way its eyes seemed to watch, filled me with an intense, primal fear. I sat there on my bed for what felt like hours, the phone still clutched in my hand, staring at the doll on the bookshelf. She was back in her original position, facing forward, utterly still. But now, that stillness felt like a deceptive facade. I knew what she was capable of. The apartment, once my cozy sanctuary, now felt like a stage, and I was the unwitting star of some unsettling, private show. I got up slowly, my legs a little shaky, and walked towards the bookshelf. My gaze was fixed on the doll. Her soft blonde curls, her delicate dress, even her slightly chipped cheek, they all seemed to take on a sinister quality. Her blue eyes, previously just pretty glass, now felt like windows into something cold and watchful. I reached out a trembling hand, hovering inches from her. I wanted to touch her, to confirm she was just plastic and fabric, that this was all some elaborate trick. But a deeper part of me recoiled. What if she moved now? What if she reacted to my touch? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't touch her. Instead, I carefully rearranged some of the books around her, creating a small, almost invisible barrier. If she moved again, I reasoned, she'd have to displace something. It was a flimsy defense, but it was all I could think of. As night fell, the fear intensified. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old building sounded like her shifting. I tried to focus on something else, to read, to watch TV, but my eyes kept darting to the bookshelf. I considered taking her off the shelf, putting her in a box, maybe even throwing her out. But a strange, almost irrational reluctance held me back. It felt like that would only make things worse, like I would be provoking her. I decided to try to sleep, but I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. I lay in bed, staring at the doll, forcing myself to stay awake, to watch her. The room was illuminated by the soft glow of my bedside lamp, and I could see her clearly. She sat there, motionless, her blue eyes seeming to reflect the light, fixed on me. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavy. My body screamed for sleep. But I fought it, terrified of what she might do, or where she might move, if I closed my eyes. The proof was undeniable. The doll was moving. And the chilling question that now consumed me was not if she moved, but why. What did she want? And what would happen when I finally couldn't fight sleep anymore? I lost the battle with sleep. Sometime in the early hours, my eyelids finally gave way, and I drifted off, exhausted. When I woke up, the first thing I did was bolt upright in bed, my eyes snapping to the bookshelf. She was there, still sitting perfectly upright, but her head was tilted significantly towards my bed. Her blue glass eyes, even in the morning light, seemed to pierce right through me. It wasn't a subtle shift this time. It was a clear, undeniable turn. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that she had moved while I was asleep. That she had been watching me the entire time. A cold, clammy sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't just a doll moving around. This was a doll actively observing me. Her stillness now felt menacing, a calm before an unknown storm. It was like she was playing a game, waiting for me to be vulnerable. I got out of bed slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on her. I felt exposed, like prey. I walked around the room, trying to avoid her direct line of sight, but no matter where I moved, I felt those eyes on me. It was an unnerving sensation, a constant, silent judgment. Her expression, which I had initially thought of as sad or wise, now seemed to twist into something more sinister. Was that a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her painted lips? Or was my fear just twisting her features? I couldn't be sure, but the effect was chilling. I tried to go about my morning routine, but every task felt foreign. Making coffee, getting dressed, it was all done under the weight of her silent gaze. I felt a growing sense of paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was studying me, learning my habits, waiting for the perfect moment. The apartment, which had been my safe space, now felt like a cage. Every shadow, every creak, every flicker of light seemed to amplify her presence. I knew I couldn't live like this, under the constant, watchful eyes of a doll that moved on its own. My fear started to morph into a desperate need to understand. What did she want? Why was she doing this? Was she just curious, or was there something malicious behind those unblinking glass eyes? The thought of staying another night with her, knowing she would be moving and watching me while I slept, was unbearable. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I had to do something. I couldn't keep her. She had to go. The decision was made. The doll had to go. There was no living with her, not with that constant, watchful stare and the horrifying knowledge that she moved when I wasn't looking. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt utterly compromised. My first thought was the simplest: just throw her away. I grabbed a large, black trash bag from under the sink. My hands were shaking as I approached the bookshelf. Her blue eyes seemed to gleam in the daylight, those painted lips almost mocking me. It felt absurd being intimidated by a doll, but the fear was real. I reached out, grabbed her firmly, and quickly shoved her into the trash bag. The fabric of her dress rustled. I tied the bag tightly, double knotting it. Then I walked to my kitchen, opened the small under-counter trash can, and forced the bag inside. It barely fit. I pressed the lid down hard, as if to seal her in forever. There, I muttered to myself, trying to sound brave. Problem solved. I spent the rest of the day trying to feel normal. I even went out for a long walk, trying to put as much distance between myself and the apartment as possible. When I finally came back, dusk was settling. I pushed open my door, a strange sense of relief washing over me. It felt lighter, less oppressive. But as I stepped into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, my eyes fell on the trash can. The lid was slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I told myself it was just the bag settling. I cautiously approached, my hand hovering over the lid. I pushed it down. It clicked shut. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle came from inside. A shiver ran down my spine. Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted the lid. The trash bag was still there, but it looked different. Swollen, almost. And then I saw it. The tightly double-knotted top of the bag was now loose. One of the knots had come undone. And from a small tear near the bottom, a tiny, blonde curl was peeking out. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the bag out of the bin, my hands trembling. I pulled it open, and there she was, the doll, sitting upright inside the bag, her dress slightly rumpled, her blue eyes staring up at me with that same unsettling intensity. She was back. She hadn't left the bin. She had somehow untied the knot and sat herself upright. I dropped the bag with a cry, stumbling backward. This was impossible. This was defying physics. How could she have done that? The trash can was small, the bag tightly packed. It wasn't just moving, it was thinking. It was actively resisting. My failed attempt to simply throw her away filled me with a new, deeper level of terror. She wasn't just a doll that moved, she was a doll that resisted. And she clearly didn't want to leave. The apartment suddenly felt like a trap, and she was the warden. I knew then that getting rid of her wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be simple. It was going to be a battle. The trash bag incident broke something in me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a dawning realization that this wasn't a normal situation I could simply handle. The doll had defied logic, untying knots and righting herself in a confined space. She wasn't just moving, she was actively, supernaturally, resisting my attempts to get rid of her. I couldn't leave her in the trash. The thought of her sitting there, silently watching me from the kitchen bin, was unbearable. With shaking hands, I pulled her out of the bag, her blue eyes seeming to hold a silent, knowing look. I placed her back on the bookshelf, but not in her usual spot. I put her on the very bottom shelf, tucked behind a row of seldom-read books, facing the wall. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Wrong. That night I barely slept. Every shadow seemed to shift, every floorboard creak sounded like tiny footsteps. The silence of the apartment, once comforting, now felt heavy with her unseen presence. I kept imagining her moving, crawling, making her way towards me. The next morning, I rushed to the bookshelf. My heart sank. The books I had carefully placed in front of her were slightly ajar. And there she was, pushed forward, sitting upright, her head turned. Not just facing out, but distinctly tilted towards my bedroom door. It was like she was trying to get my attention, or perhaps trying to make her way to me. Okay, throwing her away wasn't working. Hiding her wasn't working. I needed a more drastic solution. I decided to take her out of the apartment entirely. I found an old shoebox, wrapped the doll in a thick towel, taped the box shut, and then secured it further with duct tape, wrapping it multiple times until it was a solid, impenetrable brick. I walked to the nearest public dumpster, the kind that serves a whole block of apartments. It was huge, made of metal, with a heavy lid. I heaved the taped box inside, the clang of it hitting the bottom echoing loudly. This was it. She was gone. Out of my apartment, out of my life. I walked away, a strange mix of relief and lingering dread in my stomach. Later that evening, after a particularly long day at work, I got home and collapsed onto my couch. I felt exhausted, but for the first time in days, I felt the sense of peace. The apartment felt lighter, almost empty of that oppressive presence. I even managed to fall asleep on the couch. I woke up around midnight to a strange sound. Not a creak, not a rustle. It was a faint, almost melodic clinking noise coming from my coffee table. My eyes fluttered open. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, I saw it. On my coffee table, right in the center, was the shoebox. The same shoebox I had duct taped and thrown into the public dumpster. The duct tape was peeled back, loose, and the lid was slightly ajar. From within, through the gap, one of her blue glass eyes seemed to glimmer in the faint light. She was back. She had always come back. A wave of ice-cold despair washed over me. This wasn't just a doll that moved. This was a doll that couldn't be gotten rid of. She had followed me home from the thrift store, and now it felt like she was bound to me, an unbreakable, terrifying companion. The apartment was no longer my safe haven. It was her territory, and I was just living in it. The game had changed, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that she was never leaving. The shoebox appearing on my coffee table after I'd thrown it in a public dumpster broke me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a profound sense of helplessness. The doll couldn't be gotten rid of. She always came back. My apartment wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. I was just living in it. I placed her back on the bookshelf, her blue eyes still holding that unsettling gaze. I didn't try to hide her or throw her away again. What was the point? She always found her way back. That night was the worst yet. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at her, convinced that if I closed my eyes, I'd feel her presence right beside me. The silence in the apartment felt heavy, expectant. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound from the street, made me jump. Then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a dry rustle. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. It sounded like it was coming from the bookshelf, from her. My blood ran cold. I held my breath, straining to hear. And then a whisper. It was so soft, so breathy, I almost convinced myself it was the wind outside, or the hum of the refrigerator. But it wasn't. It was a sound that seemed to curl around the edges of the room, barely audible, like a tiny voice. It was a high-pitched, reedy sound, almost like a child's voice, but distorted, ancient. I couldn't make out words, just a string of indiscernible syllables, a ghostly murmur that sent shivers down my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat up slowly, clutching the blanket to my chest. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. It felt ridiculous talking to a doll, but I had to know. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, thick and expectant. I stayed completely still, my eyes wide, fixed on the doll's silhouette on the bookshelf. She was motionless, a perfect, innocent doll, but I knew better. Then, just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, it happened again. The faint, dry rustle, and then the whisper. This time, it was slightly clearer, almost forming a single syllable, a long, drawn-out hiss. It felt like it was right next to my ear, yet it came from across the room. A wave of pure terror washed over me. She wasn't just moving, she was talking. Or trying to. Or something was talking through her. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the impossible. The antique doll wasn't just animated, she was communicating. And that one whispered word, yes, felt like an answer to a question I hadn't even consciously asked. The realization was chilling. She wasn't just a physical presence anymore. She was something more, something spiritual, perhaps. And she had found a way to reach me, to break the barrier of silence. My apartment now felt utterly invaded, not just by her physical form, but by whatever unseen force animated her. I was trapped, not just in my home, but in a horrifying, unwanted dialogue with a doll that refused to leave. And the whispers, I knew, were only just beginning. The internet searches confirmed my worst fears. The doll was a vessel, perhaps for a lost child's spirit. The whispers I heard in the dark, the movements, her refusal to be discarded, it all painted a chilling picture. She wasn't just a quirky antique, she was a permanent, unsettling guest, and I was living in her presence. After that, the subtle movements became less subtle. I'd leave her on the bookshelf, but I'd often come home to find her sitting on my desk chair, facing my bedroom door. Or sometimes, She'd be perched on my bedside table, her blue eyes gleaming in the dim light, seemingly watching me sleep. It was a constant, silent violation of my personal space, an unnerving reminder that I was never truly alone. The whispers intensified too. They weren't just random sounds anymore. Sometimes, I'd hear what sounded like a child's mournful sigh. Other times, it was a faint, almost melodic hum, like a lullaby being sung just beyond the edge of hearing. It would always happen when the apartment was quiet, when I was trying to relax or falling asleep. The sounds were ghostly, ethereal, chilling me to the bone. One evening, I was cooking dinner, the radio playing softly in the background. I was chopping vegetables when I heard a distinct tinkling sound. It was coming from the living room, from the bookshelf. It sounded like small bells. My blood ran cold. I don't own any bells. I slowly walked into the living room, my heart pounding. The doll was sitting on the top shelf, as usual, but lying on the floor directly beneath her, nestled amongst some dust bunnies, was a tiny, old-fashioned silver locket. It was intricate, beautifully detailed, and completely foreign to my apartment. I had never seen it before. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was cold to the touch. I carefully opened it. Inside, faded with age, was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a young girl. She had blonde curls and large, wide eyes. My breath hitched. She looked strikingly similar to the doll. It was like looking into a ghostly mirror. The locket's appearance was a horrifying new development. The doll wasn't just moving things or whispering, she was manifesting objects. Was this hers? Was it the little girl's? The realization that the haunting was escalating, becoming more active and tangible, filled me with a primal dread. My logical mind had completely abandoned me. I was no longer dealing with a simple curiosity. I was dealing with a powerful, active presence, one that was slowly, methodically, blurring the lines between my reality and its own. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it was far from finished. The appearance of the silver locket, containing the faded image of a girl strikingly similar to the doll, was the undeniable proof. This wasn't just a quirky antique, it was a conduit, a vessel for a lingering spirit. The haunting wasn't just intensifying, it was becoming deeply personal and terrifyingly active. My apartment, once a haven, now felt like a very expensive cage. The doll was everywhere. I'd leave her on the bookshelf, but I'd find her on my kitchen counter when I went to make coffee. She'd be on my bedside table, her blue eyes gleaming in the moonlight when I woke up in the middle of the night. Once, I even found her sitting on my pillow when I returned from the bathroom. It was a constant, silent invasion of my space, a relentless breaking of my boundaries. The whispers continued, too. Sometimes just a faint rustle, other times that reedy, childlike murmur, almost forming words I couldn't quite grasp. But it wasn't just whispers anymore. I started hearing other sounds. A faint, almost imperceptible tittering laughter, like a child's giggle, but hollow and cold, echoing from seemingly empty corners of the room. Sometimes, it sounded like tiny, scurrying footsteps on the hardwood floor, even when I was standing perfectly still. My blood would run cold and I'd spin around, but there was never anything there. Just the doll, sitting calmly watching. One evening, I came home to find all my kitchen cabinet doors wide open. My dishes were still inside, nothing broken, but every single door was ajar. It was impossible. I live alone, and I'd made sure they were all closed before I left. It was her. A clear message that she was no longer confined to just moving herself. She was affecting her surroundings. The most terrifying moment came late one night. I was trying to read in bed, but the constant feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I looked up at the bookshelf. The doll was sitting there, as usual. But as I watched, the thin, silk scarf I had draped over my bedside lamp, just to soften the light, slowly, deliberately, began to slide off the lampshade. It didn't fall, it slid as if pulled by an unseen hand. It landed silently on the floor. And when I looked back at the doll, her head was tilted, just a fraction more than usual, and her blue eyes seemed to burn with an unsettling satisfaction. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just pranks or whispers. This was an active, manipulative force. She wasn't just moving herself, she was moving my things. It was a clear demonstration of her power, a chilling assertion of her presence. The apartment, once my refuge, had become her domain. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, living under the watchful, increasingly active eyes of a doll that wouldn't leave, and was making sure I knew who was truly in charge. The fear was no longer about what she might do, it was about what she was doing and what she was capable of. The sliding scarf, the open cabinets, the constant whispers and ghostly footsteps, my apartment had become her playground, and I was losing my mind. The doll wasn't just observing me, she was actively asserting her presence, making it clear who was in charge. The fear had curdled into a desperate, frantic need for this to stop. I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. There was only one thing left to do: confront her directly. One evening, after she'd inexplicably moved a framed photo of my family to face the wall, I snapped. I walked into the living room, my heart pounding, but a new kind of resolve hardening my gaze. The doll sat on the bookshelf, her blue eyes gleaming in the lamplight. I stood before her, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "This stops now." Of course, she didn't respond. Just sat there, utterly still, those eyes fixed on me. It felt ridiculous talking to a doll. But what else could I do? "I don't know what you want," I continued, my voice rising slightly. "I don't know who you are, or why you're here. But you have to stop. You're scaring me. You're making me crazy." The air in the room grew colder, thick and heavy. The faint scent of decay, which I'd started to associate with her, intensified. I could feel a presence, a distinct chill at the back of my neck, even though she hadn't moved. "Please," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Just leave me alone. Go back to wherever you came from. I didn't mean to disturb you. I just bought you from a thrift store." As I spoke, her head, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to tilt to the side. Not a quick jerk, but a slow, deliberate movement, as if she was considering my words. My blood ran cold. Then, from the doll, or perhaps from the air around her, a faint, reedy giggle echoed. It was the childlike tittering I'd heard before, but clearer, more distinct, and undeniably mocking. It wasn't a sympathetic sound, it was chillingly playful, almost cruel. My stomach dropped. She understood me, and she found my plea amusing. "You think this is funny?" I whispered, my voice laced with a raw edge of panic. "I'm begging you. Just leave." The cold intensified further, and the faint scent of decay seemed to fill my lungs. The invisible presence felt stronger, denser, pressing in on me. Then, the single, reedy whisper came again, clearer than ever, directly into my ear, yet seeming to emanate from the doll. No, it was a single, defiant syllable, a complete refusal. It sent a shiver of pure dread through me, deeper than any I had felt before. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't scared. She wasn't affected by my pleas. She was here to stay. And she wasn't just a haunting. She was a conscious entity with a will of her own, one that directly opposed mine. My confrontation had failed, and the realization that I was utterly powerless, trapped with a malevolent, immovable companion, was the most terrifying thought of all. The single, defiant "no" from the doll, whispered directly into my ear, shattered any remaining hope. She wasn't leaving. My desperate plea had been met with cold, mocking refusal. The realization was a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair. I was trapped. This doll, this vessel of a restless, perhaps malevolent, spirit, was a permanent fixture in my life. After that night, I stopped trying to fight it. What was the point? She always came back. She always found a way. I simply had to coexist with her. It was a terrifying, exhausting peace treaty. She continued her silent movements. I'd still find her in different places, her head tilted, those blue eyes following me. Sometimes she'd be on the kitchen counter, other times on the edge of the bathtub, even once, chillingly, sitting on my pillow, staring at me as I woke up. I learned to live with the constant, unsettling feeling of being watched, always aware of her presence in the background. The whispers never stopped either. They were usually faint, like a reedy breeze through dry leaves, but sometimes, in the dead of night, they would grow clearer. Still not words I could understand, but a soft, continuous murmur, like a child talking to itself, just beyond the edge of consciousness. Sometimes, I'd hear that unsettling, hollow tittering laughter, especially when I was frustrated or upset about something. It was as if she enjoyed my misery, finding amusement in my discomfort. I stopped having friends over. How could I explain a doll that moved, that whispered, that seemingly had a will of its own? They already thought I was stressed, maybe even losing it, after my initial frantic attempts to tell them about her. It was easier to just be alone, to avoid the questions, the pitying glances, the forced reassurances. My apartment, once a haven, became a shared space, but not with a roommate. It was a shared space with an uninvited, supernatural guest. I learned to put things away, to make sure nothing was left out that she could mess with. But sometimes, I'd still find small, strange anomalies. A book turned upside down on the shelf, a curtain slightly askew, a light left on that I was certain I had turned off. Tiny acts of defiance, just to remind me she was there, always watching, always active. Life became a strange dance around her. I tried to ignore her, to pretend she was just an inanimate object, but it was impossible. Her presence permeated every corner of my apartment, every moment of my waking and sleeping hours. She was a constant, chilling reminder of my fatal curiosity, of the day I bought a doll from a thrift store and invited an undeniable horror into my life. The haunting wasn't over. It was my new reality, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it would never truly end. The "no" from the doll echoed in my mind, a chilling pronouncement of my new reality. My desperate plea had been ignored, my attempts at escape thwarted. She was here to stay. My life was no longer my own. It was inextricably bound to this sentient, unsettling companion. The subtle hauntings continued, then became a permanent fixture of my daily existence. I stopped trying to move her. I stopped trying to hide her. It was pointless. I'd simply come home to find her in a new spot, on my desk, facing my bed, even once, impossibly, perched on the top of my television. Her head would be tilted, those large blue eyes following me, a silent, unblinking judgment that permeated my entire apartment. The whispers evolved too. They weren't just random sounds anymore. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear what sounded like a faint, melancholic humming, a ghostly lullaby. Other times, it was a rapid, almost frantic chatter, like an impatient child, just beyond the edge of audibility. And always, that soft, reedy giggle whenever I felt particularly frustrated or defeated. It was as if she fed on my emotions, growing stronger with my despair. I became a recluse. Explaining my situation to friends was impossible. They either offered pity or suggested therapy, never truly grasping the horrifying truth. My apartment transformed from a sanctuary into a gilded cage. I learned to navigate around her, to ignore her constant presence, to suppress the shivers that ran down my spine when I felt her unseen eyes on me. Sometimes, late at night, I would just sit and stare at her. She would sit there, perfectly still, like any other doll. But I knew better. I knew about the subtle shifts, the whispers, the way she could move objects. I wondered about her story, about the little girl in the locket, and what tragic circumstances had bound her spirit to this antique toy. Was she lonely? Angry? Or was she simply enjoying her new companionship? The haunting wasn't a temporary event, it was my new normal. The doll was a constant, chilling reminder of my folly, of the day I picked her up from a dusty thrift store bin. She wasn't just a quirky find. She was a life sentence, a permanent, creepy companion that would always be there, watching, whispering, moving in the shadows of my home. My freedom, my peace of mind, had been traded for a few dollars and a terrifying, unbreakable bond. And I knew with absolute certainty that she would be with me forever. My life became a chilling testament to the adage, be careful what you wish for. I sought a unique find, a quirky addition to my apartment, and instead, I invited a haunting. The doll, with her silent movements and whispered words, became a constant, terrifying companion. My home was no longer my own. It was a shared space with a malevolent entity, a prison I couldn't escape. The blue-eyed doll, a seemingly innocent thrift store purchase, transformed into a symbol of my permanent captivity, a chilling reminder that some objects carry stories far darker than their price tags suggest.